like you to answer that question. You can send us your views on the Twitter handle at SABC Newsroom. You can also do so on our Facebook page. But remember in 2013, President Pierre Nkurunziza in Burundi approved a new media law which critics condemned as an attack on press freedom. The law forbids reporting on matters that could undermine national security, public order, or the economy. Under the current unstable political climate in Burundi, news coverage and reporting in the country is likely to be disturbed. Now, for more on media coverage and covering the crisis in Burundi as well as Africa, we joined in studio by Wellington Radu from Media Monitoring Africa. Wellington, once again, a very good morning to you and welcome.
Good morning, Elvis, and thank you for having me again.
Now, first and foremostly, let's take a look at Burundi as a country and the media coverage that the country has received. Do you think that it has received adequate media coverage, not just continentally, but internationally as well?
I think when you look at issues around adequacy, you're talking about two things essentially, in terms of one, quality, and the other one is the quantity of the coverage. If you look at the quantity, for instance, of the coverage, it's a very difficult thing to determine. However, if you look at the quality of it, then it's something that you can drill down and really look into. If you look at the quality of the coverage in Burundi, it's very depressing, particularly because if you look at our own local media and how they cover it, it's reduced to 5 lines, right? Which essentially says, look, this is a number of people have been killed, people are running all over the place, and this is what's happening in Burundi. You're not given the context as to what's really happening. Is it a tribal issue? Is it about the third term that the president announced that he wanted to have? Or is it about other things? What are the issues that are being done to solve that conflict? And those are some of the things that are missing from this. And what that does is that it feeds into the very same thing that international media does when they cover these things. Often they present Africa as this dark continent where conflict is inevitable, it's tribal, and people are barbaric. And this is a problem that we're also feeding as local media.
Now, talking about that, because we would, on this particular program, we tend to look at Africa in a different perspective, a more positive, because there's so much positives that is not being highlighted on the continent. Yep. Isaac Kormos mentioned it a couple of times before, that the issue in Burundi is not necessarily a countrywide issue. It's pockets of protest, it's pockets of people happening there. Well, maybe that's his own view, but the point is, there is pockets of excellence in the country that is not being highlighted. But as Africa, and how does the Burundian crisis now influence the outlook for Africa from a media perspective?
Well, you're spot on. So the issues that are coming out of the media coverage of Burundi is that, one, you have the presidency or the president and the government saying there is no crisis, right? And then you have other activists saying there is a crisis. Who do you believe? And this is, I think, the role that media has to play in articulating those issues, in getting to the bottom of those issues. I know, aside from the fact that there isn't resources, be it time or otherwise, yes, that's fine. But if we are to move beyond presenting Africa as this dark continent, we have to invest in our own media so that we can cover those issues in a holistic manner and we tell our own stories. And I must say, though, that what we are seeing in the last few years is this whole discourse around the decolonization of the academy, for instance. So we're having all these ideas about Africa and portraying Africa in a positive light and not looking at Europe or looking at Africa from the eyes of Europe or a Eurocentric perspective. And I think this is something that's really good, and we will have to see where this takes us.
Which media, in your view, has been more prominent to look at Burundi and the Great Lakes as more prominent?
That's an interesting question, because prominence would assume that it's either they're covering so much, but the question is, how much of that is really good quality? That's what's important. And I think what we tend to see is that international media cover these things more than we do. But when they do, they almost push this white supremacy idea or viewpoint about Africa, which doesn't give us that much of a context. And when we get pockets And I mean, there are very few pockets of excellence within African media that tries to unpack some of these things. You know, the AU summit, we have been talking about it earlier, right? And we know what's going to happen is that there isn't anything going to be dramatic out of it to report, right? But it's important for local media or African media to follow the proceedings and to hold these heads of states accountable for the decisions that they make. Because often what lacks is that they pronounce all those things at the AU summit and media doesn't interrogate them and say, but hey, you resolved that you're going to do A, B, C, and D, but where are we?
So now there's a new media law in Burundi, and we also believe that the Burundian media has been experiencing cyber attacks. You want to tell us more about that?
It's also interesting that you're asking me that question because we would assume that media should be telling us this, which again proves the point, which is to say it's our role, it's the media's role to unpack these things and tell us, but you will get one story about it.
Yes.
And beyond that, nothing. I mean, let me give you an example. Yesterday, there was a story about Eritrea, right, which appeared in the media where it was alleged that the government had said men should marry more than one wife, right? But the facts were not verified in that story. And then the question is, why do you report it? Why am I raising this? I'm raising this because it's important that when we do cover Burundi in this instance, we got to verify facts. Because often in conflict regions, it's very difficult to go in and to cover stories. But it's important also to have context within and to unpack all the issues so that at least we have an idea as to what is happening on our continent.
Spotlight on Africa. Wellington Radu, thank you so much for joining us here in studio.
Thank you for having
Wellington
me.
Radu is from Media Monitoring Africa, and we need to change that narrative.